So here's something I didn't think I'd see anytime soon. Check out this one-bedroom, one-bathroom apartment in downtown Toronto. The last time it was up for rent, it was going for $2,380 a month. That was in 2022. It was put back up for rent this month for $2,288 a month. Almost $100 cheaper. Here's another listing from Vancouver. One bed, one bath. In June 2023, it was renting for $25.90. Now it's $24.90. Again, $100 difference.
Rent prices are finally starting to fall after a steep and punishing climb.
Yeah, rent has been on its way down for a few months now. And here's what it looked like in Canada's major cities at the end of last year, according to data by rentals.ca, in the Vancouver area, Calgary, and in the Toronto area, which is confusing, right? Because we're in an affordability crisis in this country, especially in these cities. The cost of housing has never been higher, and yet rent, while still high, is getting cheaper.
We haven't seen rents fall at the national level like this in at least 20 years. It's a story of demand and supply.
We'll get to the demand. Let's start with the supply. In 2024, housing supply in big cities actually went up a fair bit. And if you're thinking, what are you talking about? I thought we were in a supply crisis.
Supply is extremely constrained. We're not seeing any new listings.
We have to build a lot. We have to increase supply significantly.
Now, suddenly you're saying, wait a second, there's so much supply in this particular category that the prices are going to plummet?
I'd qualify all this by saying big cities finished building a lot of one kind of supply. High-rise buildings with tons of units, both condo and purpose-built rental apartment buildings. In Toronto last year, more than 5,000 apartment units finally came online.
The same dynamics are in Vancouver as well, that we had a lot of construction of purpose-built rental that had begun in 2017, 2018, that's now hitting the market.
That's a lot of rentals suddenly available.
These buildings are, when they come on stream at like 300, 350, 250 units at a time. And these are owned by companies. So there is incredible pressure to fill the building up immediately.
It creates competition that you've got these new units online, and you've got the building owner who wants to rent them out.
Which all makes sense. More units brings prices down. But where are all these buildings coming from? Well, these are projects that were started years ago when interest rates and building costs were low and when government policy encouraged these types of builds.
And even before the pandemic, we'd seen prices and rents rise in a lot of communities going back to about 2016 or so. And that created the conditions to get new buildings started. So part of that was economic conditions, and part of it was policies like the federal government making more mortgage loans available for apartment construction.
And while 2016 feels like a lifetime ago, Trump won his first election, Brexit became real, Brad and Angelina broke up. These buildings can take about 6, 7, 8 years on average from start to finish. And back then, there was a lot of demand for these types of high-rise rental builds.
We have seen in 2023 and 2024 a lot of buildings come online that were planned, almost a decade ago.
But there's another side of the supply part of this equation, and that's condos, because a ton more of those were also completed last year. 30,000 units in Toronto alone.
It was a record high. The average over the last 10 years is about 20,000 units, so it's like 10,000 units higher than what's considered to be average.
That's a lot of condos being added to the market, but what happens when you can't sell them? Well, you might rent them. You see, a lot of condos aren't bought by people actually planning to live in them. They're often investment properties. 65% of condos under 600 square feet are bought just to make money. Because for a while there, pre-sale condos were kind of a great way to turn a big profit. You'd buy a condo before construction at a decent price, and the market was appreciating so quickly that by the time that condo was finished, maybe you could sell it for double what you bought it for. Easy money. But in the last couple of years, the math on all of that has changed. Construction costs are higher. Development fees are higher. Interest rates are higher. It all went up, meaning that healthy profit that you could take right to the bank got gobbled up. And what seemed like a great investment might actually have ended up costing you money.
You had a lot of, kind of mom and pop investors who bought pre-construction condos 7 or 8 years ago, now have taken possession of them, and they don't entirely know what to do with them.
New condo sales in the Toronto area dropped to the lowest quarterly total since the financial crisis.
Toronto's particularly bad for this. Listings are at record highs. Sales are at a 30-year low. And if you can't sell, what then?
There's nobody living in a townhouse or a house that wants to move into a 455 square foot dog crate condo, right? They never planned on living there. No one at all.
A lot of times they're saying, well, I'm going to rent this thing out, right? Because my other options aren't looking fantastic.
Bingo. Those condo units end up flooding the rental market. And now, in cities like Toronto and Vancouver, growth in unit completions is actually outpacing population growth.
That means you have more supply that could potentially be available per capita, per person. So that's been trending upwards pretty dramatically.
And here's the thing, this massive expansion of supply is only half the explanation. Canada's population grew by about 3 million people in the last 3 years. And that's a pretty central development in this whole housing crunch.
The Canadian rental market reached a record high last month.
Another record high last month.
A record high in January.
So in the GTA, the population was growing by about, 9 people for every studio apartment, right? And you can't really fit 9 people in a studio apartment, right? So that creates these tensions.
You can see, if we look at Ontario, just how much condo rent climbed in tandem, basically with the rise in population. The dip was the pandemic. But these unsustainable prices were a big part of the reason the government pulled a U-turn on its immigration policy.
Today, we're announcing that we will reduce the number of immigrants we bring in over the next 3 years, which will result in a pause in the population growth.
That backpedal on Canada's immigration policy is a big factor contributing to weakening rental demand, given newcomers do represent a large share of the renter base. The average newcomer has historically rented for the first 5 to 10 years living in Canada.
This incredible boom in population for 3 years is now going to turn into a substantial bust.
And if you want to see the effects of these policy changes playing out in real time, just look at the cap on international students that was announced at the beginning of last year.
The federal government will cap the number of student permits over the next 2 years.
According to Universities Canada, there were 45% fewer international students enrolled in colleges and universities in the fall of 2024 compared to the year before. Places like London, Ontario, and Kitchener that have high student populations are also seeing rents fall fast.
It's not a coincidence that the communities where we're seeing rents drop the fastest are communities that have high international student populations.
And there is another factor here that's playing a role in the decrease in demand in big cities.
The cost of living in Canada is sick.
Does someone want to explain to me why Canada is so expensive, but it just doesn't even make sense?
Consider this. Nationally, the unemployment rate was 6.7% in December, up from 5% just 2 years earlier. But in Toronto and the surrounding areas, it was a lot higher, 8.4% in December. And for younger people, it was even higher than that, 14.4% across the country. And the younger you are, the more likely you are to be a renter.
And so with that in mind, it's very possible that the labor market weakening could be putting downward pressure on rental demand as few younger people move out onto their own into most likely what would be a rental.
So yes, maybe more people are staying home with their parents or splitting the bills with roommates. In British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec, listings for shared accommodations have shot up nearly 50% in the last year.
I can't afford a one-bedroom by myself, I don't think. So if you need a roommate...
I'm trying to find a new roommate.
Now, cheaper rent doesn't mean cheap rent. Those units I showed you at the beginning are still well over $2,000 for one bedroom. But a lot of these trends we've been seeing do look like they will continue this year. More building completions and population decline to come. So if you are a renter, this year might not be a bad time to look around.